Good morning, I'm Joanne Bacher, and I am happy to introduce our speaker today. And I'd like to say how I got to know Frank is about 5 years ago, I broke one of my arms. I've actually broken two in two different ways. But anyway, I was told by Janet Nordstrom, who some of you may remember, was one of our long-term people in the church who knew everybody in the church. And she recommended Frank to me for driving since I could not drive since I had a broken arm. And that's how I got to know Frank Alioto, because after he retired, he started doing various things, and one of them was driving people like me. But anyway, he's been a union member since 94, firefighter since 1983. Is that right, Frank? Can't read my writing. Retired 8 years ago. And he's combined his interest in history with his love of his previous vocation as a firefighter. So I'll turn it over to Frank. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So as Joanne said, I'm Frank Alioto. I grew up in Milwaukee. I lived on the east side, just a few blocks from here with my parents and brothers. And in the 1960s, before we moved to Bayview, where I actually grew up, there were a lot of fires in this area. It was kind of an area more in decline than on the ascent, and quite a few fires. And my parents would take me to watch, and that spurred something in me to want to do that job. So I like excitement, I like teamwork, and I like action, I like helping people, and I love my community. So that all seemed to work well with a career in the fire service. And I was able to achieve that in 1983. Had a very fun and rewarding career. Felt like I made a difference. And as Joanne said, I'm into Milwaukee history, and I combined it. So I made a show for you and for others. And without further ado, because we have limited time, I usually do this show in an hour. This is going to be a 40 minutes, so I have to go a little quicker. But anyway, there will be time for questions at the end. So, without further ado, Milwaukee was founded or incorporated in 1846, and it grew quickly. And as fires occurred, because remember there were horse barns and hay and wooden structures for the most part, a lot of fires occurred, and there was no professional fire department. So firefighters were actually volunteers in the early years. And it was a very hard scrabble group. They weren't well revered by people. They were kind of the dregs of society. And but the fire insurance companies would pay them if they put a fire out. So it actually grew along ethnic and neighborhood lines. These firefighters were like little clubs at the corner, and they would gather whatever equipment they could, and if they put out a fire, they made money. So they competed against each other. So there might be an Irish crew from the 3rd Ward against the Scottish crew from Yankee Hill and so on. And they actually would fight over the hydrant and access to the fire so that they could be the ones that get paid. So it wasn't really as organized as it should have been. And that was true in a lot of American cities. And this is some of the early crews and equipment. I'm not going to get bogged down in dates, but this is like 1850s, 60s, 70s. Some of these photos. This is the firehouse on Broadway and Wells. It's still there, but it no longer has that tower. And then in 1875, the city taxed people at the rate where they could afford a professional fire department that would cooperate company to company. They got uniforms, they got updated equipment, technology was improving. So this is one of the first photos of one of those early crews. 1875 about. And the early firehouses, this is the one on Brady Street, had towers for a lookout person to look for a fire. Now, how they distinguished a fire from the coal smoke and the factory smoke and the ships in the river is amazing. But anyway, they initially had a lookout tower such as that. And then eventually they took those towers towers down because they weren't needed, although they still have a smaller tower to dry hoses. And there's another thing you notice here is horses. Every firehouse had a team of horses, and they were very proud of their horses. These were smart horses. They actually knew locations by the telegraph system, some of them. And they imagine these people lived in a barn with horses. So it wasn't really a revered, desirable career as it might be thought of today. They actually lived in a barn and took care of their horses. The horses pulled the equipment because it was too heavy to pull by hand. And this is before, of course, motorized apparatus. You see some of the crews photos, some of the older firehouses with their horses. This is a fire insurance patrol company that would go around and look for hazards, try to reduce the hazards, fire prevention. Here's a great photo of a team of horses pulling engine 7, steam pumper 7 on the south side. Some great photos. These steam pumpers were top heavy, and it wasn't unusual for them to topple if the horses pulled them too quickly around a corner. And this is engine 6 that had toppled over just a couple blocks from church here. Engine 6 was on Brady Street. This is one on the south side that tipped over. Engine 7 on Maple Street. Now, a lot of the early fire department had a lot more firehouses in a more densely populated area, and now it's more spread out because motorized apparatus, you don't have to hitch a horse and you can get there quicker. So it's more efficient to spread the firehouses out. So a lot of the old firehouses have new uses because they're nice old buildings. You may recognize that one. That's on 8th and North. It's still an old firehouse, but no longer used by the fire department. This was Engine Company 3 in Walker's Point, a restaurant that recently closed. So there's all kinds of new uses for old firehouses. This is actually a health clinic in the 3rd Ward, Old Engine 10. This is a dwelling on Bartlett and Irving Street here on the east side that was once Truck Company 5, Ladder Company 5. Same building. And you can see maybe you can see that white dot between the 4 firefighters standing there as a dog. That's a tradition. They would have pets that often Dalmatians, that's how Dalmatians got associated with the fire service. They like to chase horses and keep them in line and make them go faster. And this is a ladder truck that was invented in Milwaukee by an industrialist, Henry Bustrin. And there's that ladder up in the air. It was wooden, so it swayed in the wind. You wouldn't believe. It takes a special kind of crazy to do our job. And those steam pumpers were fed by coal or wood. And they would suck water out of the river or the lake or a cistern, which is a rain collection system, before we had hydrants. And notice those steam pumpers made more smoke than the fire. And there were veterinarians who would usher the horses away from the scene to keep them safe and so they wouldn't get agitated. This is a fire on Broadway and Michigan streets in the 1800s and shows you even today fires draw crowds. There's a view of a cistern. It looks like a sewer, but there's a vat that collected rainwater and they would suck water out of there and then the steam pumper would push the water through the hose line to put out the fire. Milwaukee also had a fireboat fleet. There was over 20 miles of waterfront. You include the river and the lakefront, and it was almost all industry. Grain elevators, coal piles, lumber factories, and especially before we had good fire protection systems, there were a lot of fires along the riverfront. So we had a fireboat fleet. At one time, there was up to 5 boats that were fully manned and stationed. Here's some great photos of fireboats sucking water right out of the river and spraying it. to help put out the fire on the waterfront side. That's the Metropolitan Block Fire in 1975. I remember that fire as a kid. Fires, although they're tragic, make spectacular photos. I have a lot of them to share. This is an interesting vehicle. It's a sled drawn by horses to take equipment to the scene. This is a chief's buggy. Even to this day, we use a lot of the same old terminology, and they call the chief's car a chief's buggy in the fire service. Comes from this. And then in the 1920s, it segued over to motorized apparatus, like you see in the foreground. And you can almost see the horses kind of not too thrilled with that idea. They were going to get phased out, but there's a great photo to show the straddling of two eras. So then these old fire trucks were actually made at the shop in Milwaukee on 1st and Virginia Streets. We still have a shop there, but they no longer make apparatus. Here's some good photos of those. There's a little bit later one, a post-war one. And over time, we didn't just fight fires, but they incorporated medical services into the fire department. The old way of doing it was to just load a person onto a police ambulance and rush them to the hospital no matter what condition they were in. The fire department now, of course, has paramedics, and we work closely with them. Many of us are paramedics. And we treat the person on the scene and stabilize them, which is much better for your outcomes, whether it's a heart attack, a drug overdose, a shooting, a car accident, you name it, we go. Another shot of an early emergency medical team in the fire department. And over time, there were so many different types of rescues that we would go to that we incorporated all kinds of equipment. Some of it's from war usage or industrial usages, ropes, lights, all kinds of, I could go on and on with the types of equipment that we use to affect different kinds of rescues. And then the next chapter is life in the firehouse. It's a very unique job. We work a 24-hour shift and get 48 hours off. And that's kind of nice because you can be home with your family and your kids more than the average worker. And you have this second family at work that you have a camaraderie with. You eat together, you shop together, you have bunks in the same dorm and sleep near each other. You live together, it's your family. You see a lot of crazy things together too. So there's a little, and there's some downtime. There's some relaxation time in a 24-hour shift. Play cards, watch TV, sit out front and pet people's dogs. But you have to be ready to go no matter what, at any moment, whether you're in the middle of a meal, going to the bathroom, showering, boom, out the door in 30 seconds to a minute after a call comes in. Some early photos of Milwaukee firefighters ready to slide the pole from the dorm, which is usually on the second floor in the older firehouses. Fires that shaped Milwaukee's history. I'm going to share some with you here. This is shows some of the dangers, especially older time firefighting, when they didn't have as much safety consideration. It's still a dangerous job, but it wasn't unusual for building collapses and fires that burned out of control. We've gotten much better at safety, but it's still a dangerous job, as I said. This is the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company fire on Water Street in 1906, and that 7 firefighters perished and 24 were injured in this collapse. This is the Newhall House tragedy. It was one of Milwaukee's, well, it was Milwaukee's biggest fire loss for human life. It was a hotel on Broadway and Michigan Streets, and over 70 people perished in this fire. It was a wooden hotel, very popular hotel, but it was all made of wood, and there was a big atrium, burned from the basement up in the middle of the night. There's a monument in Forest Home Cemetery to the people who died, but it was very tragic. That's a national newspaper that featured the Newhall House fire. This is 1883. And it showed some of the ways people were rescued, jumping in the nets, jumping out of windows, crawling across the alley on fire ladders. A lot of people were saved, but a lot were lost. This is a huge, our Milwaukee's largest fire in property loss, the third ward conflagration. The conflagration is a fire that burns out of control for many blocks. It started in that building on the right with the ladder, the Union Oil Company. And they thought they had that fire put out, but the burning embers went onto the roof of a building across the street. This is on Water Street where they just built that new apartment building on Water and St. Paul. And it was a windy day. And I don't know if you can all see, but that's a map of the third ward, and the etched in area is all the parts that burned. So the fire started on the upper left, and the wind was blowing northeast, and we would have lost all of downtown east of the river, but the wind shifted, thankfully, and it burned out of control all the way to the lakefront where Summerfest is today. There's a long list of the factories that were lost. That was a very industrial area. And this is from a book called After the Fire. Shows all these factories and what they looked like after that. This is 1892. And the whole third ward basically burned. There's only a handful of buildings. If you're familiar with the restaurant, the Wicked Hop, that's one of the few buildings that survived that fire on Broadway and St. Paul. I know I'm mentioning street names. They may not be familiar to you, but just go with the flow. But the third ward was reduced to ashes. They brought fire trucks from Sheboygan and Chicago and Racine on flatbed rail cars to try to help save. This is a Milwaukee gas plant. And that's the Irish community was in the third ward between the factories and the lakefront. This is what their little shacks looked like. They just went up like, paper described it as like they were made out of paper. There's one little shack still surviving somehow. Only 4 people died in this fire. Okay, this is no longer the third ward fire. This is just, I wanted to show what it looks like to fight a fire even today in the winter. Everything gets wet and freezes on you. Hose lines, it's very difficult. Here's a quirky one. City Hall got struck by lightning in 1930 and burned just the steeple. They could reach the rest of it with ladders and hoses, but they had to let that burn down like a candle. And it's not uncommon for lightning to strike churches as well. I've been to like 3 church fires that were started this way. This is St. Stephen's Church by the airport in the I want to say late 90s maybe. This is an iconic building on Brady Street that was lost. Brady Street's just a little north of you. If you're not familiar, Showalter's Pharmacy. A lot of old timers from the neighborhood fondly remember the lunch counter there and the soda fountain, classic Americana. And that was destroyed by fire in 1953. You can see St. Hedwig's Church in the background as a landmark. But it was another January icy cold day. Spectacular photos of a great loss, and that's the aftermath of it. All my research, I've never been able to find a photo of this building before the fire. So if anybody knows of one, there's even Showalters out there, but I haven't been successful. And one of the reasons it burned was, or not how the fire started, but the reason the fire got away is Engine 6 on Brady Street, 1 block away, was being renovated, rebuilt actually. So they had to wait for fire trucks to go from a little further distance. The next series are fires I remember as a child that inspired me to want to do this job. This is an oil tanker truck or a gasoline truck that turned the corner on 1st and Florida Street, and the gasoline splashed up on the pickle factory. Jewett and Sherman pickle factory, and probably a light switch or something that had electric spark ignited the gasoline. And it was a spectacular loss. There's still a little remnant of that building in the railroad bed behind where the building was. It even made like a fire tornado. It was so hot. This is the Pine Bridge in Bayview. I lived a block from here and watched that fire as a child. Railroad cars full of grain burned and a wooden trestle. This is the First Baptist Church fire. I remember this as a child. It was 1 block from here. There's a vacant lot where there's a daycare, 1 block west of here. That's what stood there before. First Baptist Church, Milwaukee. This is the Humble Park band shell. It was lit on fire as a senior prank by Bayview High School students. It used to look just like the Washington Park band shell. They rebuilt it in a different style. That's like 1976 or so. This is a grade school that burned downtown here on Jefferson Street. These are all fires, like I said, that I remember either watching on TV or seeing as a child. So now my career. In 1983, I achieved my childhood dream. This is my academy graduation photo. I'm on the middle row, left side, 21 years old. It's a proud day for any firefighter. We go through very rigorous training. Only a third of our class passed the training. Book work, physical work. It's a 3-month academy. This is my first assignment, Ladder Company 18 on Brewers Hill. It's been cut out of the budget. Engine 21 is still there, but the ladder truck's gone. It was fun to drive the back end, the tiller it's called. I lied, this is my first assignment. That's me and my mom on Warren Avenue in 1963, 62 maybe. Okay, this is my first fire, and it was the Matthew Keenan house is on Jefferson Street. 1984, I had 1 month on the fire department. And this fire broke out. The building's still there. I'll show you an updated photo. We got trapped on the 3rd floor. That's our crew yelling for help. We couldn't find a window. We were crawling around. It got really smoky and hot. We'd fill the heat building. We couldn't find a window where the stairwell was burning. One of my colleagues found a window, smashed it out, and we yelled for help, and they got us this ladder, but they couldn't get the ladder up on time. That's me on the right side window trying to crawl out. And I ended up falling because my boss was starting to feel enough heat where he was getting burnt. And he told me to get the F out of his way. Excuse me. Anyway, so then immediately after we jumped out, it ignited up there. And that's me in the foreground. You can see how blackened my mask is. My helmet was melted in the back. My mask was supposed to be yellow like the other one. So we were lucky to get out of there. That's what the building's like today. They restored it. Jefferson and Wells or Mason. I don't know if you remember the War Memorial had a fire. We put it out and they fixed it. These are all fires I remember from my career. This is the Norman building. It was an apartment building downtown. Talk about spectacular photos. I believe 4 civilians died in this fire, but it was like a 5-story apartment building that burned pretty much to the ground. This is the Century Hall, which was a very famous Milwaukee icon, bowling alleys, wedding hall, restaurant, bar. I used to go there and watch bands. It burned in the late 80s, 1988. And it took out, this is a newspaper photo of the aftermath. It took out 3 buildings. And Century Hall is a large building, a big old warehouse. And then right next door to that was Pizza Man, which burned a little later. I was at that fire. We almost lost a crew in there too, who was trying to rescue people. Everybody got out. That's one of the fires I remember that from, it was around like 12th and North. And that's me. I made lieutenant. And then you're in charge of the crew on your fire truck and do the paperwork and discipline and take orders from the chief at an incident and then have your crew do what they're trained to do. So you have a lot more responsibility. And that's one of my favorite crews to work with. And I want to point something out that I think is cool. the Milwaukee Fire Department diversified at a large scale, and we're better for it. We bring in more experiences, more perspectives. You can see women, Black and Hispanic people. And I want to harken back to that earliest photo I showed you. It's 100% white males. They wouldn't have thought of anything other. But as long as you can do the job and make it through the academy, you're part of the team, and it's awesome. To have a more, and here's to show how diversified we've gotten. This is an all-female crew. And this is the Black Firefighters Union. Unfortunately, they weren't treated well with regard to promotions and things, so they had to form their own union. And hopefully we continue to become more enlightened about these issues. A little bit about firefighting itself. We tend to have two different responsibilities. There's engines and ladders. Engine is a pumper that pumps the water and has the hose lines. The crew takes the hose lines inside and tries to fight the fire from the inside, rescue people, secure property, and so on. Ladder companies break out the windows, smash open the door so you can get in quickly if it's locked. If you break out the windows, it's a cheap way to ventilate, so there's less heat inside. And the fire doesn't move laterally through the building, it moves out the window. And it makes it more tenable for the engine crews inside because there's less heat and more visibility. But it gets hairy on the rooftop. Sometimes you have to scramble off after you chop a hole. The ladder companies chop a hole in the roof because that's the best way to ventilate a fire in a house. You can see it's sometimes treacherous conditions, but it tends to draw people who are risk takers and like action, even though there are risks, you know. And there's an example of what happens when you get a hole in the roof and then it vents. So all that smoke would be inside, but it's pouring out the roof because smoke and heat rise. Makes it a lot easier to get in and save property and people. It can get crazy at times, but it's fun. If a fire is burning out of hand, you really can't get inside, then you fight from the outside, which is what a lot of rural areas end up doing, because by the time they get there, that's how far away the fire has progressed. And one of the first responsibilities is to keep the fire from spreading to the house next door, because as you know, in a lot of Milwaukee neighborhoods, the houses are a gangway apart. So that's an couple examples of that. And then after the fire, there's a couple hours worth of overhaul work, where you take axes and pike poles and rip things apart till you get at all the little hot spots. This is a good example of that. Fire burns within all those little crevices, and you can't just leave the site or it'll flare up again. Take out the window jams and everything. This is the Falk Company explosion in 2006. I was the first lieutenant on scene, and a whole workshop there blew up from a gas leak. And this is just how powerful that explosion was. There were 3 civilian workers who died. I'm often asked, what are some of my more unusual calls? And this is one I like to point out. 2 guys stole a car, and on 92nd in Wisconsin, they were being chased by the police, and they took a right turn going north and went down a hill, not knowing that there'd be a dead end. And this house is at the dead end, and they were going 100 miles an hour. The car hit the curb, went over that wall. The wall was built because the house had been hit before by a car. But the car flew through that tree, knocked a big branch off, cleared that wall, and went through that window. And this is what we saw when we arrived. It gets better or worse. There's a woman in bed under that car. She was sleeping. And I wouldn't even talk about this except she was unscathed. She had some hot oil that dripped on her forehead. So how does that happen? You say, well, the car embedded itself in the wall behind her bed, just enough where it didn't fall right on her, but it was inches away from her. And this is an example of some of those rescue type things. You have to think fast and use your equipment. We took, there's the backside of that wall where the car's embedded. We took the legs off the bed, lowered the bed, got her out, And then we dealt with the passengers in the car. One was dead. He had a gun in his lap. I guess, I'm telling you tragic, potentially traumatic things, but these are the kinds of things we see on a daily basis. You never know what you're going to see next. And there's probably a stress level to that. I'm sure there is. And we've gotten much better at counseling firefighters after dangerous scenes or tragic scenes where you lose a colleague or a civilian, because we do take it personally. And we've gotten better at counseling instead of saying, oh, you get over it. So I did want to share that. And also, it's not always tragic. Some of the calls we go on are absolutely hilarious or fun. I like to tell this one. It happened a block from here. I was working at Engine 6. Lance is here. He was my driver. Thank you for coming. I don't know if you were at this call, but we got a call on New Year's Day, like first thing. The printout on the computer said, drunk, naked, and stuck in a stroller. So we're like, this can't be right. Typo maybe? Well, we get to the scene in this apartment building hallway. There's a woman who's drunk, naked, and she collapsed in her neighbor's stroller and was stuck in it, passed out. So we had some fun with her. But anyway, I could tell stories all day long, but we have limited time. Anyway, I achieved the rank of Battalion Chief. This is me with one of my last crews at one of my last fires. I retired in 2015. It was absolutely fun, memorable career. Have friends to this day that, we saw crazy things with, so you build a real camaraderie. It's fun to serve the public, be a part of the community. Even when you're sitting in front of the firehouse, giving treats to people's dogs, you're a part of the community. And I love that part of the job. I wasn't made to be like a 8-hour-a-day office person. So, I sped through this. I realized that. I used to do this show with an expanded stories and so on, but we have limited time. But anyway, we got through it, so that's good. Now, are there any questions? Yes.
Did you know Ed Mahowski?
Who?
Ed Mahowski.
Ed Mahowski, I did not. There were, when I came on the job, there were over 1,000 firefighters. It's down to like 800 due to budget cuts and efficiencies and so on. You don't learn everyone, or you don't get to know everyone, but you get to know a lot of people. I did not know him. I don't know if we were on different sides of town or what. Any other questions? Yes.
Hey, Frank.
Hi.
How is recruitment going now for the fire department?
I'm 8 years removed and I have no idea. No, I haven't really kept up. Lance, do you know?
4.5 years removed.
I love my job, but I'm on to new chapters. I do speeches.
Having trouble recruiting police officers.
Right.
And the state put a requirement of a minimum number of police officers in, or else money is taken away from the city. So I have
a feeling that it's easier to find young people or people of any age that are willing to do the fire service more so than the police service today.
Yeah.
For a litany of reasons, but I don't have firsthand knowledge. Yes.
In the horse-drawn days, did they literally have to hitch up a horse with each call?
Well,
that?
Yes. What's that? Oh, repeat the question. Thank
Yeah.
you, Mike. The question was, how do they hitch up these horses? It sounds like a long process, right? Is that the gist of your question? Right. I've seen photos of harnesses hanging above the apparatus. So I'm sure they would take the horses out of their paddock or whatever you call it and set them up, and the harnesses would drop down. I'm sure they found, I wasn't there, believe it or not, but I'm sure they found efficient, quick ways to do it because there was incentive to get there quick. And certainly we're much faster today with motorized apparatus and, could go on, but they were probably quicker than we could imagine. And I have heard stories and read stories where the horses, when they used to have a telegraph system, like maybe the call box on the corner was call box number 134. When the telegraph would come through the firehouse, some of the horses knew the locations, or at least enough of the locations. Yes.
I came here late, service ran over, but perhaps you already addressed it.
Okay.
What effect, if any, did 9/11 have on the local firefighters?
It was,
Repeat the question.
okay, what effect did 9/11 have on firefighters locally? It's a good question. I was always able to deal with the stresses and trauma from the job in, ways that relax me, and I can't speak for everyone, but that was a particularly rough day because I was working and we had a lot of calls because people were under stress, so there were a lot of heart attacks and things, but not on the firefighters, but civilians even. But it was a very tough time. It took me a couple of years to bounce back mentally and emotionally. I mean, I had a family to raise, I had a wife and marriage to keep going, and it wasn't easy. It was a tough time, and I'd say a little uncertain time, because what could happen next and so on, and I'm kind of feeling that again today. But to further answer your question, a lot of firefighters fundraised for our colleagues in New York because we are a brother and sisterhood, and a lot of them went to funerals. For some, it's to show support. For others, it may have given them closure. And some went there and dug on the pile, which has its own hazards. But like any trauma, whether it's collective or individual, I think time heals. And there's certainly other ways to heal yourself from things like that. Good question, though. Yes? Anyone else? Yes?
My father was a firefighter.
Yay. Where?
In Milwaukee. So he ended up retiring. Well, I remember mostly 47th and Center Street.
Okay.
It's no longer there.
No longer a firehouse, but it's a city.
He
Wow.
ended up retiring. Off of 3rd Street, I think he was-
13 for a life.
Third and hour. Yeah,
Oh,
one.
hour.
Yeah, that's engine 18 and ladder 10. They're long gone. That was rebuilt on Holton Street. You care to share his name?
Joe Kaminsky.
I knew some Kaminskis, but I don't think I knew him. I think he predated.
And yes,
Yes.
yeah, my dad and they were in Center Street together.
Okay.
For many years, and very good friends.
So you have the perspective of a daughter of a firefighter and him coming home with stories and
Yeah.
dirty and,
3 days off in a row.
okay. It's different now. It's every third day for 24 hours. Very unique schedule.
But he was, I remember they were encouraging the hobbies at the fire station.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of keep them busy and.
Seemed like every firefighter has their own little side specialty. Mine was playing basketball on the playground. I'm joking because my wife always would say, all these firefighters have this side job where they're making extra money, roofing, fixing cars, plumbing, and you play basketball. I make my extra money working overtime days. Anyway. Yeah, I knew all the Recklesses, of course. Yes. Yes, Joanne.
Yeah, I have a family in Philadelphia, and in visiting there on the old houses, there would be a sign as to what firefighting company they belong to,
Okay.
right? So that, different fire, there were different ones on these things.
Right. And Philadelphia goes back 100 years, more than 100 years before Milwaukee. So there's a lot more layers of tradition. But every firehouse in the city, I refer to them by numbers. Every firehouse is numbered, of course, and it's always been that way, and that's how you identify. And you even wear on your front piece, your company number. And there are avenues to change houses. Some people settle into a house and like to stay there. If you get promoted, you generally go back to a busier company where you get more experience. But, you know, so you change the number on your helmet, so you're not like married to one company your whole career. Or as a chief, like if there's two people who aren't necessarily getting along the best or aren't compatible with you would like, I mean, they're still professional, hopefully, in doing their job, but maybe this one's better in a different house and so on. So there is some movement along those lines. Yes, Bruce.
Sorry, I got here late. As I recall, your slideshow shows a picture of the fire of the Baptist church.
Yes.
block way. I'm just wondering, is there more to the story about that?
That's one I don't know anything about. Oh, the First Baptist Church fire that I showed that was a block away from here going west. Great picture. I remember it as a child because I took the bus we moved to Bayview when I was a kid, but my dad still sent me to an Italian barber on the east side. So I would take the Route 15 through the east side, and it was a Saturday, and that burned on a Saturday. That's how it's etched in my head. But I was on my way to the barber. So now I'm like, ooh, watch a fire or get my hair cut. It's kind of a leave it to Beaver home moment. Go home with my own haircut. No, actually, I went to the haircut, but I did remember that fire because of that.
It
Yes.
was a big fire, right?
Yeah, it was. That building was destroyed. Yes.
I just have fond memories of going to the fire department, building on 20th and Camden.
Okay.
To get, license for my bicycle.
Oh.
That's where we have.
And that's now a church. Like
Yeah.
every firehouse the old firehouses that are abandoned and then they rebuild them somewhere else that's more efficient or better located or whatever. As I showed you a few examples, but that's one I didn't show, but that's a church now. Yeah. Yes, sir. Good question. Are there a lot of fires set by arson? The answer is yes, but it's probably not the leading cause of fire. There's bad electric, lightning strikes, as we talked about, children playing with lighters or matches. Although we've gotten better at educating kids at a young age. We have a Survive Alive house that kids go through and tell the importance of not doing that. Careless smoking materials. And then there's arson, of course, which has its own breakdowns: revenge, concealing a crime, insurance fraud. So yeah, and we've gotten pretty good at determining the point of origin and the cause of a fire. So a lot of times people think they can hide how a building burns, but we're pretty good at detecting through various clues how a fire started and possibly who even did it. So another question back there.
Do you have any, in pop culture, maybe TV and movies, do you have any favorite depictions of firefighters and all least favorite?
And also what?
Least favorite.
Oh, that's not a good question for me. The question was, do I have favorite TV shows or movies about firefighting? I watch very little TV. I'll watch some local sports. I'd rather be out doing stuff. And it doesn't excite me to watch what I did for 32 years. I'm like on to new things. But I did see Chicago fire several times. And I thought that's pretty realistic of life on the fire service and how it is to go in a fire. Backdraft was kind of Hollywood-ish. There was one called Ladder 49 that I found entertaining. I think John Travolta was in it. Anyway, I found that entertaining, but it's hard to depict a fire on TV because it's usually black and smoky inside. So when you see these guys running around doing things, you work by feel and communication and practice. So it's hard to depict what it's like in a fire in Hollywood. So a lot of it doesn't resonate with me anyway. Anybody? Oh, you haven't had a chance.
Is there something you can tell us that we as community members can do to show appreciation? Or is there, I'm just
I'd
thinking
say,
I'm in organizations and stuff.
right. The question was, is there something you can do to show appreciation for local firefighters? And I think I think the number one thing to me would be politically active enough where you advocate for the fire budget so we don't lose companies because it's more dangerous for the public and ourselves. And everything's about money right now, as you know. Secondly, I would say, get to know your local firehouse. Almost anywhere in the city, they're gonna be open arms. Pop in with your kid or grandkid, you know, let them climb on the truck. That's how I got started. Get to know them because they're there to help you. It's a community resource. So either as in your neighborhood group or even as an individual, don't be shy about making the firehouse and your firefighters in your neighborhood part of your local family. It's appreciated.
Our senior center plays Wii bowling and we have the firefighters.
That's awesome. Yeah, anything like that. You get to know each other.
Now we're
Mhm.
connected.
Yeah, it's about community. And I think in a lot of ways we lose those communal connections. And I think there's a firehouse in every neighborhood. So it's built for community. And even on Brady Street, where I was the captain, we would host community meetings and have a chili social once a year. That was very popular. So good question.
Speaking of that,
Kate.
I live on Brady Street, we lost them.
Yes. Okay, good question, because I live near you. There's 3 firehouses that surround that one, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons why they found that one during budget time to be extra. There's one on Bartlett and Park near Riverside High School. There's one on Brewers Hill on Palmer and Lloyd, and there's one downtown here on Broadway and Wells. So they're kind of equidistant surrounding this neighborhood. And if I didn't repeat her question, it was, where can she call her neighborhood firehouse?
Well, that was a good
So
one.
I think the one on Bartlett and Park is very neighborhood oriented. Yeah. People often will, and I'm not advocating for this or begging, but people will bring like a turkey on Thanksgiving to show appreciation if we have helped them, or, you know, if they bake cookies, they bring them. You don't maintain a figure like this not eating cookies. I just noticed my mother-in-law's here and she helped with that effort too. So, yes,
Firefighters are really
yes. What,
and they all would pitch in, they'd shop together and.
Right.
Steal carrots and potatoes and.
that's part of the, and I'll repeat that because we're doing this online as well, but the comment was firefighters are good cooks, and most of them are. It's something you learn young on the job, and you either help the person who is the cook and eventually take over, or just remain a helper most of your career. If you get promoted, you generally have other responsibilities. But we do shop together. We prepare the meals either together, or we make sure we're looking over the shoulder of the cook, and then we eat together, which is a good way to keep a team having good camaraderie and good togetherness.
You and I were good years.
Yes. This is Lance Bertram and his wife Mary. He drove it. We didn't set this up, but he's here. Thanks for coming. We haven't seen each other in a long time. He was my driver at Engine 6 on Brady Street and downtown when I first made captain. We kind of followed each other because we like each other. And thank you for coming, Lance and Mary.
Constant Venmo when we're done. We had a great time.
I think you owe me. Any other questions, comments? Anybody who's gonna leave here and wants to light a fire somewhere else? Leon.
Lightning rods, that is all done. Some of these-
Well, I'm sure those buildings had lightning rods, but I don't think they're 100% foolproof.
Do they help fire or hinder it?
A lightning rod?
Yeah.
I would think they prevented a lot of fires. I think Ben Franklin was onto something. However, and the question was, do lightning rods help? Because we talked about some lightning strike fires. I just think that sometimes maybe the amount of charge overcomes whatever was absorbing it, but I don't know the full science, but definitely I've been to a few church fires, and that City Hall was a spectacular fire in the 30s that a lot of people never knew happened, but the whole top part of City Hall burned, and it could only reach with hose lines a little bit below that.
Yeah.
Yes, George, right?
One last, do you know this person, Michael Subjecti?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when he came on, he was like a class or two after me, Michael Sujecki. And he didn't stay on the Milwaukee Fire Department. Did he transfer to another community?
Yeah, he became a professor at MATC, so, that's.
I remember when he moved on, but yeah, sometimes people move on to other careers. But I think most people who get on the Milwaukee Fire Department love their job. I'm not saying Mike didn't, probably had a decision to make or a different path in his life. Yes, Mark.
What effect do metal roofs and solar systems have on firefighting?
Well, having been gone 8 years and solar's ramping up more in those years than before. I've never been to a fire that I can remember. I don't know about you, Lance, where we had solar panels on a roof that we had to ventilate. So I'm sure they have protocols and they remove them in some way. It adds certainly an amount of weight to the roof that you have to factor in as an officer if you're worried about collapse. But I don't think they cause fires. I just don't know how they handle buildings that happen to have solar. So I wish
What about metal roofs?
Metal roofs, that's the other part of your question. As far as ventilating them, I don't think it matters. We have saws that work, we have concrete blades, metal blades, wood blades, whatever we need, we can grab and use. So I don't see that as a hindrance. I never have experienced that, but probably easier at the end of the fire because shingles and the boards underneath is very labor intensive to rip apart when you have cinders, burning underneath. It takes hours to sometimes strip a roof under dangerous conditions often. Great questions and comments.
Very tall apartment complex. I'm assuming the building is with.
Yes.
See, just because I know.
Right.
Not that high risk.
Thank you, Barb. The question was, what about high-rise buildings? And I can elaborate on that. A lot of the fires I showed you are on, most buildings were like 6 stories or so tall back in the day because that's as far as you could go without an elevator. And gradually they started building taller and taller buildings. And some of the more spectacular, dangerous fires were in taller buildings. But now, over time, they've incorporated all kinds of technologies to protect you. Stairwells that are enclosed and won't burn, so you can get away from the smoke and get down. We have all kinds of elevator keys and things to operate elevators in a fire situation. There's sprinklers. There's something called standpipes, which is a built-in pipe in every tall building. We can connect at a connection at the base of the building and at whatever floor is below the fire, and the water will go through that pipe in the wall rather than hauling hose up and up and up, which is very hard. So every tall building by code has to have all these protection systems. A sprinkler is set to go off at if a certain temperature pops a little metal thing or chemical, whatever, however they're set up. The heat pops that and the water free flows through that sprinkler and just isolates the area that's burning. A lot of fires I've seen started that way in like a factory or a warehouse, and they get confined to a small area. So all different technologies have improved that. So, the tallest ladder truck maybe goes 10, 12 floors up. So we can still affect rescues that way, but people are just as safe staying in their rooms up in a high-rise fire. Very few high-rise fires spread beyond the room that it starts in because they compartmentalize each room. So I could go on and on. Hopefully that answers your question. And so many areas, we've become better at fire prevention and fire technology systems, where these fires that I showed you, the real spectacular ones, years and years ago would take out whole blocks or whole buildings often. And even in my early part of my career, we had a lot of factory and warehouse fires. And now there's hardly any. So it's working. Yes, Kate.
I live in a and it totally burned out that whole unit.
Right.
And outside of water damage to the floors below, some smoke damage, the other units were not.
I remember that fire. I could see it from my house, and
Yeah,
that was like Christmas time.
I was on vacation. My ex-husband, my boss called us and said, I think one of my employees needs to stay. You better give me a call. I'm on vacation. But, you know, I was my forward.
But the point being, it was confined to one room, even though it was a fully burning fire. Everybody got out safely. The firefighters weren't hurt and they put it out. That's typical now.